Hi guys, Jack Scarf here, Director of Scarf Property Solutions, and the first thing you'll probably notice to address the elephant in the room is that I've had my hair cut and I look about 10 years younger. Whether that's good or bad is not for me to say, but it's something that you might have picked up on. I hope that you guys have got to the hairdressers too. It was the thing that I miss most about lockdown, to be honest with you, which might say a lot about me, but managed to get through the rest of it okay, found my way through it, spent a lot of time with my children and my partner, which was great, still managed to work a lot, which is fantastic as well, but I did miss my haircut and my grooming. So here I am back, and hopefully this is what I should look like more often than not. And in a couple of weeks ago I mentioned shared ownership in one of my videos, and I know a lot of you guys are property investors, so it might not be relevant for you, but you might see on Rightmove when you're scrolling down a property that looks incredible value and it has shared ownership on there. So it still could be relevant for you as well, even if it's just to discount that and say, I can't buy this property, and I move on to the next one. So what I'm going to do is just give you a balanced argument. I'm not going to say if it's good or bad. Give you a balanced argument on what shared ownership is. So first explain what it is, say what the good things are, and say what the bad things are. And then if it's something that you want to look at, feel free to get in touch, of course. Otherwise, speak to another qualified mortgage broker in that area and work out whether it's going to be right for you. So what is shared ownership to start with? It's where, rather than buying 100% of the house as you would in a conventional purchase, you only buy a share of it. So you might buy 25%, 50%, 75%, and on the part that you don't own, you would pay the rent to the housing association that own the remainder of the house. So it can be a flat or a house, and it can be a brand new build. A lot of shared ownership properties are, but it doesn't have to be, because it could be an older build property as well. And often these properties will be bought by first-time buyers. So let's explain why you might buy one and what the benefits are of shared ownership. So the first thing to factor in is that they're quite good for first-time buyers because you can live in a house that's worth, say, I've got a customer at the moment buying at 520,000 in Oxford, but she's buying a 25% share. So she's only actually buying £130,000 worth as a share rather than buying the whole 520. Could she buy the 520? No, it wouldn't be affordable on the lender's criteria. But buying a 25% share, she's buying 130, therefore she can afford to do it. So that would be one benefit, is if your affordability doesn't work out to buy at a higher price, especially if you live in more expensive areas, London, Oxford, Cambridge are three examples where I help a lot of people out. They buy a lot through shared ownership, and it can be flats or houses. So you've got a little bit of flexibility there as well. Another good thing about it is, while you're only buying 25, 50, 75% initially, you can actually buy the whole house eventually in most of the schemes. And that is one really, really important thing to check out when you're first looking at buying the property is, at some point, can I buy the whole 100%? Can I, what they call staircase, to 100% of that property? So when you buy it initially, yes, you're only buying a share of it, but if you can buy the whole thing eventually, then that might put you in a better position than renting, in your opinion. Another good thing about shared ownership is that sometimes you don't even need a deposit. So I've helped a lot of customers out where they haven't had a deposit, but they can buy through shared ownership with zero deposit. So if you're looking to buy a home and think it's just not possible because I don't have a deposit, I've got maybe a couple of thousand saved up that I could use for fees, this scheme could be for you, and it could mean that you can get on the housing ladder. A lot of them as well, because they're newer builds, they'll have a 10-year guarantee, a lot of the times with an HBC, but it could be with an architect or something, but it means you've got warranty basically for 10 years. Anything goes wrong, the house builder will come around and they'll fix it for you, which is another benefit. So for some people, to get on the housing ladder, it can be a really good thing. Let's have a look at the negatives as well though, just to balance the argument out. So the first thing to note, really, really important, is that you will pay rent on the part that you don't own. This is on top of your mortgage payment. So your mortgage payment's often going to be lower because you're buying either a smaller property or you're buying a portion of a property. So the amount you're purchasing is actually smaller. But you're still going to have your mortgage. That payment might only be a couple of £100 a month. However, you will pay rent on the amount that you're not buying. So it makes sense that if you're buying a 25% share, then the amount of rent you pay will actually be higher. And if you're buying a 75% share, the amount of rent you'll pay will be lower. On top of this, you will have, often you'll have ground rent and service charge as well, because a lot of the time the property is a leasehold while it is within the shared ownership scheme. Even if it's a house, while it's in the shared ownership scheme, it's going to be a leasehold property more often than not. When you exit out and you buy it out entirely and it's yours, then you can look at changing that over to freehold because you will own the land. But while it's shared ownership, you will not. So the customer I've got at the moment who is buying in Oxford, 130,000 of a 520,000 property, the rent that she has to pay on the bit that she doesn't own, £890 a month. So for a lot of people, that's a hell of a lot more than your mortgage payment. And for a lot of people, that's more than they're paying in rent, if they're just renting a property and they don't own it. So factor that in when you're buying the property, and please do speak to a qualified broker about this who will help you through the process. And if they don't know and they don't understand it, I'd strongly advise that you speak to someone who does, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. I can't get a shared ownership mortgage if I've got bad credit. I can't get a shared ownership mortgage if I haven't got a deposit, all this kind of stuff. So do look into it and do speak to someone who knows what they're talking about in that area. So other disadvantages of the shared ownership scheme, it's quite inflexible in terms of you live in the property, no one else does, but the housing association are quite rigid in what they'll let you do. So if you want to raise money on your mortgage to pay off debts or to buy another property or for personal expenses, to buy a car, whatever, shared ownership company will say no. So you can't remortgage for those things once you've bought the property. So if you are looking at it, it really is just for people that can't get on the housing market elsewhere and they want to buy a property for them to live in, because you can't rent it out as a buy to let. You have to live there yourself, and it has to be, really, really important, the only property that you own. So if you own a property now, if you're selling that, you can buy shared ownership, no problem. If you don't own any properties, you can buy shared ownership, no problem. But if you own a couple of buy-to-lets and you want to buy shared ownership to live in, not an option at all, even if those other ones are through a limited company. So that's well worth factoring in when you're looking at buying a shared ownership property. So a couple that I've touched on there, it's difficult to refinance through them. It's difficult to get a remortgage other than to just refinance the money you've got in the property, which can be a bit of a bind and can be a bit of a tie. And also you can't own any other properties at the same time. And while we're talking about the mortgage side of things, it's well worth pointing out and well worth noting down that actually when you come to refinance, or even when you buy it, it can be quite an expensive process, and it can be quite an arduous process as well. So buying a shared ownership house can take a hell of a lot longer generally than just buying a standard purchase. And you're going to need more for solicitors. And then when you come to refinance, remortgage the property, if you want to buy out further shares, which is of course the dream and why a lot of people would do it, then that in itself is going to cost you a lot of money in solicitors too. So that's not me trying to talk you out of it. I just think that people really need to be aware of what the shared ownership process is and the benefits and the cons of what shared ownership is and how it would work for you. So you definitely want to balance that out when you buy in, and you might think actually the extra that it means that I'm going to need to pay over the next 2, 3, 5 years to buy it in full myself is actually going to cost an extra 15,000 if I was just buying another one. Or you might think, it does mean I can get on the housing market now and get on the ladder now, where I couldn't otherwise. So yeah, just balance those out. It's probably worth noting as well that you have to have an income of under £80,000. If you've got over 80,000, you're probably not using shared ownership anyway, but it's just worth factoring in. In London, that's actually 90,000. So as long as you're earning less than that, you can go through the scheme. They'll have to check your affordability, etc. So yeah, I think shared ownership probably isn't going to be something that you guys deal with a lot, but I have seen an influx of investors, especially in Oxford, Cambridge and London specifically, where I've got a lot of clients that are looking at it. And for those people, it can work really, really well. It can work well in the rest of the country as well, but you might not need to venture into that scheme. You might be able to save yourself on some of those other costs that we mentioned and have maybe a more flexible option where you just buy and you don't have the shared ownership side of things as well. So I hope that gives you a bit of information. If you are considering it, then you know what to factor in and how the process works. Now, it is quite complicated. So as I said a couple of times on this video alone, do speak to an expert mortgage broker about it who can hold your hand through the process and take you step by step through it. But for now, that should give you a bit of free value. And if you're considering buying through shared ownership, should really explain to you how it works, which I think is really, really important. So thanks a lot for your time. Really appreciate that. Do subscribe, then you'll get, you'll be able to watch all of the other videos that I've got on there as well. And if you hit the notification bell, you'll be alerted before anyone else when a new video comes out. So thanks again for your time. Have a great week next week. All the best. Take care.